You're listening to a Roddenberry podcast.
Don't touch that dial. We'll be right back. We'll have more news this evening, but first...
The latest Gene-ology, a Roddenberry podcast.
Episode 46, Charley Red Dog. Welcome to Mission Log Gene-ology. I'm Earl Green.
And I'm Ashley Thomas. Each week we ask you to leave your guns at the door and enter the podcast with an open mind as we discuss the early works of Gene Roddenberry, looking for signs of the morals, meanings, and messages that would eventually make their way into his most famous work, Star Trek. Earl will be back with trivia in a moment, but first, here is how you can reach us. Gene-ology is meant to be entertaining and informative, but it's also just the beginning of an ongoing conversation about the works of Gene Roddenberry. Drop us a line at missionlog@roddenberry.com and join us on X, formerly known as Twitter, and Facebook at MissionLogPod. While you're at it, please leave us a review and rating at Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast platform. And please remember, your comments could be used on future installments of Gene-ology, so say something nice. And now, this week's trivia. Take it away, Earl.
Thank you very much, Ashley. We have tried to be dogged and relentless, looking all of this stuff up for you. Charley Red Dog aired on December 12th, 1959, and is the last episode of Season 3 that Gene would write for Have Gun Will Travel. Interestingly, this episode is directed by Ida Lupino. Ida had a long career in front of and behind the camera. Her acting career began in 1931 with her final role in 1979. She started directing in 1949 and would garner 42 directorial credits across film and television. She directed 8 episodes of Have Gun. Ida was often given Bette Davis hand-me-down roles, but she was as tough and rigid as Betty herself, refusing them. Warner Brothers suspended her for it, and this is where she started directing. She is considered a pioneer among women directors and is the second woman ever to be inducted into the Directors Guild. Richard Boone told columnist Erskine Johnson in 1961 about her skills as a director, quote, "Ida stimulates me as an actor because she knows acting. In a weekly show, you get into acting patterns. Ida gets you out of them." End quote. We lost Ida in 1995. Scott Marlowe plays the titular Charley Red Dog. Though he plays a lawman here, Scott made a name for himself in Hollywood as a young actor playing juvenile delinquents. This is Scott's second appearance on Have Gun, and the second time we've discussed him on Gene-ology. He played Roy Crowder in the Season 1 episode The Hanging of Roy Crowder. Scott would also go on to star in another Gene property where he played Keeve Falor in the Star Trek The Next Generation Season 5 episode Ensign Rowe. Raymond Bailey plays our attorney-at-law, John Staffer. Bailey had a prolific career across film and television, acting in 3 episodes of Have Gun, though Charley Red Dog is his only work with Gene. He's probably best known for his role as Milburn Drysdale in 248 episodes of the Beverly Hillbillies from 1962 to 71. London-born actor Cyril Delavanti plays our shopkeeper, Cornish. This is his first episode of Have Gun Will Travel, and he'll have one more in Season 3, though this is his only Gene script. Cyril and Gene ran in similar circles, and he also acted in episodes of I Led 3 Lives, Highway Patrol, and Mr. District Attorney. You might also have spotted Cyril in a little sci-fi film called Soylent Green. We lost Cyril in 1975. Hugh Lawrence plays Lem, one of the men giving Staffer, Cornish, and Paladin some backup in today's episode. This is his only episode of Have Gun and his only work with Gene. Hugh would have a 13-year acting career across film and television, but it would be cut short when he passed away at the all-too-young age of 45 in 1969. K.L. Smith and Kelton Garwood would play our silent brutes, Gus Johnson and Joe Denver, respectively. Smith would work quite a bit with Gene. He was the first guard in our previously discussed episode, The Hanging of Roy Crowder. He would also work with Gene again in 3 episodes of Lieutenant as Sergeant Jack Arple, and would later play a Klingon in the Star Trek Original Series episode from Season 3, Elan of Troyes. Garwood would work predominantly in westerns, though he actually got his start in Hollywood as a magician, playing one in an episode of Peter Gunn in 1959. Being as horse opera was the bread and butter of the television and film industry during that era, he took horseback riding lessons so he could gain more roles in westerns, hitting many of the biggest shows in the genre, including The Rifleman, Rawhide, Laredo, and of course Have Gun Will Travel. Kelton is perhaps best known, though, for his role as Percy Crump in the later seasons of Gunsmoke, though he would play 3 other characters in earlier seasons of that series. Finally, Irish actress Fintan Myler rounds out the cast as Miss Shannon, our stenographer. She would star in 4 episodes of Have Gun, but this is her only Gene script. According to the Have Gun Will Travel companion, Ida Lupino actually specifically asked for Fintan Myler for the role, which she found very flattering. Myler would work steadily from 1957 through 73, but retired from the biz to raise her 2 daughters, Rory and Darcy. In her later years, she worked as a literary agent and acted in commercials. She would pass away in 2005.
Act 1. Our episode opens in the Hotel Carlton. Paladin is talking with the hotel clerk. We see a pretty lady descend the stairs and ask Paladin if there's something she can do for him. Before Paladin can say anything, she says she's in suite 24 and hands the clerk a stack of letters. As she walks away, she turns, gives a smile, and ascends the stairs. When Paladin remarks how much he loves San Francisco, the clerk identifies the woman as the new hotel stenographer. Looking a bit dejected, Paladin says that even the city has its disappointments. With renewed determination, Paladin ascends the stairs after her, completely bypassing another woman who tries to catch his eye. Paladin is next seen dictating a letter to our hotel stenographer, to one John Staffer of Santa Maria, New Mexico. Paladin acknowledges receipt of his $500 payment, but clarifies he will not provoke a gunfight. This gives the stenographer pause, but she keeps typing. Paladin says that in the event a satisfactory solution cannot be found, he will refund the $500 minus expenses. He includes his card as an enclosure, and with a musical flourish, the letter is finished. The stenographer, Miss Shannon, asks Paladin what made him change his mind about her. He says, a wise man will let some friendships age like a fine wine before sampling. Shannon remarks that she's seen some of Paladin's friendships walking through the lobby. Any friendship that they might share will be much cooler. Paladin replies that some friendships, like good wines, are best served chilled. They will discuss it again in about 3 weeks. Paladin, on his way to New Mexico, rides up to a young man and his campfire. When asked where he is going, in Spanish, Paladin tells him, and the young man invites him to share his campfire and dinner. He's going that way as well, but first Paladin must drop his gun. Paladin hands it over, and the young man introduces himself as Charley Red Dog, United States Marshal. Charley Red Dog then demonstrates some of his gun skills, albeit a bit clumsily. Paladin advises him that a drop of fat in the holster will allow the gun to slide in and out more smoothly. Charley then offers a pan of viejas to Paladin, a dish of beans and rabbit cooked in small red chilies. Delicious and native to his people, the Navajo. When Charley remarks that Paladin must have Indian blood, as he's enjoying the meal, Paladin says he unfortunately does not, but he has come to appreciate some of the benefits, like a plate of viejas. Paladin observes that Charley is rather young to be a marshal. Charley informs him that he has almost 20 years as a marshal without complaints from the Institute. Charley then presents his diploma, showing fees paid and exams passed through a correspondence school. Paladin asks if he found out about the school through a magazine or a newspaper. Charley says yes, but it's the United States Marshal Correspondence Institute, and this is the United States government. Is there a problem? When Paladin asks him to listen, Charley says, no, Paladin, you must be opposed to education. Paladin objects. Then Charley says, well, you must be opposed to an Indian as a U.S. Marshal. No, says Paladin. Charley goes on to say that he was the top student at the reservation school and that they even had to get special courses for him. His family was very proud of his accomplishments, and that diploma means that they have fair government in Washington. Marshal Charley Red Dog might sound like a funny name to some white folks, but Charlie has vowed that his name will stand for justice, honesty, and fairness as it's written in the law books, or he will die in the attempt. Paladin remarks that if he does ride into Santa Maria, he probably will die in the attempt. Charlie informs Paladin that he's no stranger to death there, as his father was used as target practice for the crime of passing a saloon while Indian. Paladin lets him know that he's going to see a Mr. Staffer there about such a thing. Charlie is already familiar with his plan, bring a gunman in to ward off another gunman. Charlie says what he wants to do is, as in Abilene, prohibit the carrying of weapons. When Paladin asks about carrying his gun into Santa Maria, Charlie says only if he can take it from him in a fair fight, which he will give him, where one of them will die. Paladin says he'll see Charlie in Santa Maria, but when Charlie is out of sight, Paladin pulls his Derringer out and sighs. Act 2. Santa Maria. Paladin is getting a dressing down from John Staffer, attorney at law, for his harebrained scheme. Paladin says it's not harebrained to suggest appointing Charley Red Dog town marshal when he already has a marshal's badge. Staffer objects, saying they hired Paladin to handle that. Paladin reminds him he is not a hired assassin. They need law in the town, but no one is foolish enough to take the job, except Charley Red Dog. Staffer objects, saying they'll just end up with one dead Indian kid if they give him the job. Paladin says that it doesn't matter because Charlie's going to try to do it whether they like it or not. Further, he says that if he were Charley Red Dog, an Indian boy who had one chance to stand as tall as any man, he'd rather die than be stopped. Staffer says, who's going to respect a marshal named Charley Red Dog? Paladin reminds him that respect can be contagious as measles if spread properly. Paladin says that he'll be standing by Charlie one way or another. The men reluctantly agree, but if Charlie gets killed, they don't know either one of them. Paladin excuses himself to go borrow a gun. Charley Red Dog rolls into town and puts up a shingle, setting up the new marshal's office. While walking past the saloon, Charlie gets roughed up by a local brawler, informing him that walks are for white men. Paladin proceeds to tell that guy that, hey, you bumped into me, and gives him a few good punches for bumping into him. Paladin enters the saloon and gets invited to join a posse of folks to ride the marshal out of town. Paladin informs the guy that he didn't remember speaking to him, and that he talks too loud and too much. When the leader of this posse tells Paladin that he talks big for a man without a gun, Paladin gives him a good gut punch for his trouble and relieves him of his weapon. When the other men try to pull guns on him, Paladin says he doesn't want to interrupt their card game, then cuts the cards for them by shooting the deck. One of the men says that Paladin's gun is as quick as his temper. He could even give Joe Denver a run for his money. Paladin says he's heard of Joe. Apparently he's the man who quote-unquote runs the town, and he'll be back tomorrow. Charlie enters the saloon and tells Paladin he'll be taking that gun now, please and thank you. In fact, he'll be taking every single gun in the place, same as in Abilene. The men of the saloon laugh in his face, but Charlie stands his ground. Paladin plays along, telling the marshal not to draw down on him. They're just funnin' after all. Charlie asks him how many more times he must take his gun. Paladin hands him his newly acquired pistol. The men are surprised. You mean Charlie took Paladin's gun before? Really? Paladin says, hey, you might want to draw down on Charley Red Dog, but not me. He's seen him work. The men back down a bit, and Charlie borrows a tub from the bartender. It's time to pass the tub like a collection plate. Guns go in, please and thank you. The men relent, turning over their guns, and Paladin breathes a sigh of relief. Later, Paladin, Staffer, and the others watch from the safety of Staffer's office as a man named Gus Johnson approaches the marshal's office. Gus is apparently a real, quote-unquote, engine hater. Charlie tosses Gus out of his office and gives him a good whooping for his trouble, relieving him of his gun. Paladin breathes another sigh of relief, thankful not to have had intervene. Later, Cornish, the storekeeper, tells Paladin and Staffer that he overheard 6 men saying they're going to get the jump on Charlie later that night at his office. 6-1 isn't good odds. Paladin says Charlie will have to learn to face some odds, even if they're not good, and then says he'll see what he can do to help reduce them. Act 3. The posse enters the marshal's office, 3 in the front. asking for their guns back. Before Charlie has time to say no, 3 men come in through the back door. Charlie should have locked up. A fight breaks out, and it looks like Charlie is going to have his butt handed to him. That is, until Paladin shoots the light out of Charlie's office, and then punches the lights out of 2 of the men, tossing them through the window before sneaking out himself. Charlie's handled the other 4 already. When others in the town see what's happened, Charlie steps out of his office and says, "If someone could get me another lantern, I'll see about making some arrests." Off the other men of the town go to find the marshal a new lantern. The next morning, Charlie is officially sworn in as town marshal in Staffer's office and is given a real badge this time. Just in time for Joe Denver to ride into town, and he's waiting for Paladin. Paladin offers to bring Joe in for trial since he's got half a dozen murders under his belt. It won't hurt Charlie's reputation. It's just one gunman selling out another, after all. Charlie objects, walking out to meet Joe himself, popping Paladin on the back of the head, knocking him out. Charlie apologizes, saying, "To uphold the law, so help me God." And he didn't mean that lightly. Charlie and Joe face each other in the street, while Staffer and Lim wake up Paladin with a jug of water. Paladin sends Lim to Cornish's store to go get him a gun. The Derringer he's hidden is no good in a shootout. Lim dashes off while Joe and Charlie face off. It's no good anyway, as the marshals locked up the guns first thing. Paladin roars and runs out to try his best with the Derringer, but it's too late. Shots have already been fired. But it's not Charlie on the ground. It's Joe. Paladin didn't have to fire a shot. Walking over to the body, Charlie says, "Hey, you were right. A drop of fat in the holster makes all the difference." Paladin starts to pocket his Derringer, but Charlie reminds him, "Hey, there are no guns allowed in Santa Maria, Paladin." Paladin is just going to have to hand it over, but it will be returned to him when he leaves. Paladin says, "That's a good law, especially when the marshal is so skilled with his." Charlie thanks Paladin for shooting out the lantern in his office. Paladin says perhaps he ought to have been in jail for having a gun and doing that. Charlie says a man should learn to overlook things, like the gun in the hands of a friend, or a worthless diploma from some dishonest correspondence school. Charlie says while he figured it might have been a dishonest school, it did give him direction, which is what a simple Indian boy needs, almost as much as he needs respect. Paladin says that respect is important to all men. Some will even risk death for it. Charlie says, and some will just give it to others. He shakes Paladin's hand in thanks as the wind blows the ripped-up diploma over the body of Joe Denver. The next morning, as Paladin prepares to ride out, Staffer, Lim, and Cornish tell Paladin that he ought to split his fee with Charlie. After all, Charlie did all the work. Paladin says they're square. The marshal has the town's gratitude, and Paladin has their money. Paladin rides off, and Marshal Charley Red Dog waves him a salute. The end.
Very well done, Ashley. You had a standoff with the story, and you won.
That's good, because I was afraid I was getting shot at. So
Part of me always looks at something through the filter of kind of the Abrams Zucker movies. And we're talking about, drop of fat in the holster. It would have been funny if, Charley Red Dog survived his shootout at the end, and there's, grease dripping out of his gun holster. Right. It worked, Paladin! You're right!
Just a drop.
Just poured a whole can of lard in there.
Yeah, there you go.
Smooth as glass now.
Yep. Kind of like oiling a baseball glove, but, I don't know.
Yeah, but not that much. I was questioning at the beginning of this episode, what does a hotel need with a stenographer? Because I normally associate stenographer with, a court reporter.
Right.
And it took me a second to realize, oh no, this is the beginning of hotels having a business center like they do now. Only now that's a room full of computers and, not a pretty girl who you dictate a letter to.
Right.
I did like the actress on this a great deal, and I liked that she was giving Paladin some, bro.
Yeah, I was like, oh, finally, someone who's not like, oh, what a guy. Oh, Monsieur Paladin.
Yeah.
No.
It had to happen sooner or later.
Thank God.
No one is blossoming like a tulip in this episode.
Yeah. Well, and something I failed to include in trivia, but the Have Gun Will Travel companion notes that the actress was actually originally offered a running role on Have Gun, but she turned it down because she wanted to have more flexibility to be on other shows than Have Gun Will Travel.
Were they going to make... What was her character's name in this?
Miss Shannon, the stenographer.
Miss Shannon. Was Miss Shannon going to be a regular?
It did not specify, because she was in a few episodes of Have Gun, but I don't think she ever reprised the role.
That would have been kind of interesting if she wound up being Paladin's Girl Friday, but I could also see why the actress would not want to be pigeonholed in that kind of role.
Right. She said, I was offered a running part in that series, but I didn't want to do a running part on Have Gun at the time. I wanted the independence of playing different roles at different studios. I still get residuals for that episode and other Have Guns because they have them out on video now. They don't amount to much anymore, but they were worth it then. But she said Ida Lupino gave her the part because she came up to me and said, "You're Irish, aren't you?" And I said, "Yeah." "How did you know?" She said, "Just cross your eyes. You have those lovely eyes." But she had actually specifically chosen her for that part. So I thought that was really cool.
That's very, very good casting. And I'm so glad Ida wound up directing an episode where finally someone is just like, Paladin, you are not all that.
I bet she was also tired of everyone being like, "Oh, Paladin, what a guy."
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Although I will tell you, that smoking jacket, that is groovy.
That thing is very groovy. I mean, I will occasionally partake in this cigar or some pipe tobacco, but I don't have a cool smoking jacket, so obviously going to need to get one of those.
Yeah, I mean that jacket, that did not belong to this decade. That was from the future. That was from about 5 years in the future.
I'm going to be sitting out on my front porch looking really groovy in that thing, enjoying my cigar a la Paladin.
I was impressed. It's like, okay, never mind the ladies not being in love with them. It's like, where did you get that jacket?
It's like, bro, looking sharp. I like it.
Yeah, I would love to see him roll into town like that. Like, what happens if he doesn't have time to change? Hey, the groovy gunman is here. What's your problem?
The Groovy Gunman, man, that was a lost idea from the 70s. Dude, we should make that show.
We can make it now.
We can make it now. It'll be a
Netflix.
throwback. Call us. Paramount Plus, call us.
Yeah. Paramount Plus needs the help.
Yeah, it's like, who wouldn't want to watch The Groovy Gunman?
Miss Shannon's clientele, I am going to hazard a guess here, are probably men with money. I figure that's the whole demographic of people dictating letters to her. She should really be past the point of being shocked by anything Paladin is saying there.
I think that's fair. I also can see that as a reason for her kind of being not as warm towards Paladin as so many other ladies are. Being like, I know your type.
Yeah. Oh, you shoot people for a living. Very nice working with you. See you in 3 weeks.
Yeah. No thanks. I thought the line, she's like, our relationship will be significantly cooler than some of your other friendships I see wandering around. He's like, oh, but some good wines are best served chilled. And I'm like, yeah, she's like, I ain't wine, bro.
Yeah. Dude.
She already told you no.
I figured the only thing he's got on him is a Derringer at that point. You shot both your shots. Just surrender now.
Yeah, because she ain't having it.
I did like how effortlessly Paladin slipped into speaking Spanish when he met Charlie.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting. And so I had that in my notes as well. I minored in Spanish, so I was feeling good about myself because I could still understand everything they were saying. Was Paladin speaking in Spanish because he was in New Mexico, which I'm sure spoke a lot more Spanish at that time? But is it because he sees brown man, assumes he might be Mexican?
It could be. There was a lot of mixing with the Native American community in, what we now consider to be the southern states. There was some crossover there. Thinking about this in the 21st century perspective, I just thought it was neat there was no pushback on speaking Espanol. Be more like Paladin, 21st century people, please. Even if you don't speak it fluently, conversationally. Learn some basics. No habla.
Yeah, I did enjoy that as someone who does speak a little Spanish. But also, like, I think we're starting to see a little more of that feed back into popular culture, despite people being cranky about anything other than English being spoken.
Yes.
My husband and I recently plowed through all of Cobra Kai, and a lot of Spanish is used in that show. If you watch with the subtitles on there, there is translation on there, but audibly, no, which I think is fun. Also, in the second Spider-Verse film, Miles Morales' mom speaks to him in Spanish. There's no subtitles, there's no translation, and I was like, yes! Let's do more of this, because this is culturally appropriate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yet, like 45 seconds after Paladin meets Charlie, he gets dobied once more.
I appreciate that we are using dobied as a verb now.
Yeah, it's a verb now.
Because I'm like, bro, did you not just have this scenario, like, a few episodes ago? Come on.
It feels like if we are playing Have Gun Will Bingo, that is the free square in the middle.
Absolutely. Every single episode. Paladin rides up to a campfire and then gets shaken down for his lunch money.
Yeah. Every week.
I'm like, come on, bro.
I felt bad for Charlie because it felt like he fell for one of the... at that time, it was correspondence school to be a U.S. Marshal. Nowadays, it would be name a star after someone, or what's the other one that's just ridiculous? Buy 1 square foot of uninhabitable land in the Scottish Highlands, and you are now a lord or lady. Poor Charlie.
Yeah, it made me think, you and I are both comic readers, and we enjoy comics from, like, the 70s and 80s, and all of the things you could send away for in comics, like sea monkeys, and get giant muscles with blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. Can you draw the turtle or the pirate?
Yeah, like, you too could be a comic book artist. If you can draw this, send it in to blah, blah, blah. It felt like one of those things, but, I mean, nowadays, like, send away for this correspondence course, and you too can be a U.S. Marshal. I'm like, I feel like that's going to be, like, 18 levels of illegal for, like, impersonating an officer and and that's just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, Charlie, you really should have stuck with the sea monkeys.
Oh, bro, yeah.
I know they don't look like their pictures, but it would have been a much safer way of life.
Yeah, for reals.
At the top of Act 2, I love that the show and Gene are staking out their ground here. You cannot just call Paladin into town, tell him, go kill that guy. And without even sizing up the situation, he's going to pull the trigger and cash the check. That's not what he's about. I like that we are reestablishing that frequently.
Yeah. Paladin's gun is not there to... Yes, he's a fast gun for hire, but it's not like that. He's not an assassin.
Yeah.
He's there to help, like, facilitate peace.
Yeah, and I really started to pick up on just how postmodern this one is. In the scene where Paladin convinces them, no, you need an actual lawman. You don't just need someone carrying a gun. Because that was what they wanted at the outset of the episode before he and Charlie talked them into it. They wanted they wanted an assassin on the town payroll.
That's not how we're doing things here.
Yeah, and I'm glad that they were persuadable in that regard. My next note is only 5 words long. It's not even a complete sentence. Let me know what your thoughts are on this. Paladin, enemy of barroom furniture.
Yes. I fully expect the next time he walks into a bar in one of our discussions that all the furniture's just going to start trembling.
Yeah. Yeah, it's...
Earthquake? No. Paladin just walked in the room.
Earthquake or gunshot? I'd rather it was an earthquake, man. Yeah, it'd be funny if it's like, all the guys are trembling in their boots and then the tables are sitting there.
Oh, no.
Vibrating with fear.
We're the real casualties here.
Yeah, it's always one of us, man. Also in the bar scene, anytime on TV or in a movie that someone just goes up to the barkeep and says, brandy, kind of like Captain Kirk, give me the brandy. Just once. You have no idea what I wouldn't pay for someone to stand there with a perfectly straight face and point out that she's a fine girl and what a good wife she would be. But I must inform you at this time that my life, my love, and my lady is the sea.
Such a fine girl.
I'm glad you know that one.
Oh, yeah. No, I grew up with my parents listening to oldies all the time, so I know all the old stuff. That is why, like, when that song was such a big part of Guardians of the Galaxy 2, I understood immediately what they were doing with that song, and other people had to have it explained to them. So I'm like, Oh, no, yeah. It's a great song. Great song. Looking Glass.
Yes.
One-hit wonder.
Absolutely. Cut the cards? Yeah, how about blam? We're going to shoot the cards.
It's like, that's definitely one way to cut them. I believe they are cut and probably exploded.
Yeah. I did kind of like to get to see at least one instance of Paladin getting to do something badass in this episode.
Yeah.
But there was a point to him allowing himself to be disarmed repeatedly.
Yeah. I thought that was really smart, because here he goes. He's like, yeah, I'm going to show you I'm the biggest badass in this room. And I'm going to do that by, first of all, I'm beating up a guy as I'm coming in the door. This other guy tries to mess with me. Well, I just give him one good gut punch and I disarm him. And then, the rest of y'all going to take me here. Let me cut the cards. Pow! And they're all like, oh, okay. All right, bro. Wasn't that serious. And then Charley Red Dog's like, Mr. Paladin, we've had this discussion before. I'm taking your gun. And Paladin's like, whoa, okay. Like, it's the who's a badass now meme. It's basically that.
Well, and that line, I mean, he really is, and of course it's the whole point of the episode, he's giving Charlie a big assist in this episode. He's doing some heavy lifting on his behalf. You may want to draw down on Charley Red Dog. I'm not going to.
Yeah.
Like, I just wasted your deck of cards, but I draw the line at Charlie. And Charlie needs the backup, because start of Act 3, he's using the butt of his gun as a hammer, and I'm like, oh, Charlie, don't do that, please.
Yeah, no, bad idea.
Normally, I'm a big fan of the scoring of the show and the music that they use, but in the scene where Paladin is kind of acting as Charlie's hidden backup when they are all trying to write him out of the marshal's office, we're getting comedy music while Paladin is beating these guys up. Did you notice that?
I didn't, actually, so that's a good catch. So
I just felt like that totally undercut the tension. Come on. There's 6 guys who fully expected to either chase a guy out of town or kill him. Can we treat this musically at least as seriously as we treat Paladin's business card, for crying out loud?
I think that's really fair, because that scene was so important in helping, like, establish Charlie's authority in the town. Oh, he got jumped by 6 guys and he whooped them all. I will say, though, where he steps out onto the porch and said, if someone will get me a lantern, I will make some arrests. Like, that's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The only thing missing there, maybe he did it. I should go back and check. It'd be funny if he was just dusting off his hands.
Yeah.
Kind of like Luke Skywalker in The Last Jedi. Just brushed that off his shoulder. Just walked out of an explosion. No biggie.
Nah.
But I think he firmly established himself as, okay, maybe we don't want to mess with this guy.
Yeah. I mean, it's one thing for him to throw one racist dude out of his office, let him know who's the boss. It's another thing when 6 racist dudes try to jump you, and they're like, nah, we're not going to play that way.
I did not see coming Paladin getting his butt handed to him by Charlie twice in the episode. And yet I kind of love that, because the whole point is that as long as Charlie is wearing that badge, even if it's the tin star that he got with his correspondence course, as far as he's concerned, the law applies equally to everyone, with no exceptions. And that includes Paladin. And it's quite a journey that this episode takes, that we go from, can we just get a guy with a gun in here, to a better marshal than they had any right to expect, given what the criteria were when the story started.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and, I'll talk some more about this in our discussion, but Charlie, it was so important for him. Not only, he's already established some authority by whooping those guys' butts, but the fact that we don't have a white savior here. this is so important. Like, no, he is all like, okay, nope, I have to go do my job or die in the attempt. And that's how I'm going to do things. Like, people with that kind of integrity are so rare. I really admire anybody like that. I think that's amazing.
Are we perhaps seeing here just a hint of a Pike or a Picard or a Kirk, do you think?
Definitely. Because this is how my brain is wired. I kept thinking about Brienne of Tarth, because basically she's like, I vowed to protect Sansa or die in the attempt. I vow, like, Brienne's all like, I must keep all of my vows or die in the attempt. That is her main motivating thing, like keeping her oath. She's the oath keeper. That's why her sword is oath keeper. And gosh, don't I want to be that person. For me, like, the fact that he used the phrase or die in the attempt immediately just triggered that in my brain, because Brienne's my favorite character in all of fiction, and that's exactly what she does.
And whether you're talking about her or about Charley Red Dog, you failed to take them seriously at your peril.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, Ashley, we are standing our ground with Charley Red Dog, and boy, by the end of that episode, standing your ground against Charley Red Dog does not seem like a healthy occupation.
It certainly does not. He definitely, puts his money where his mouth is.
He does, and yet there's also a certain amount of, and Paladin, this is where Paladin is really assisting here. There's a certain amount of building the legend that has to happen. And so it kind of reminded me, I don't know if you remember this, the second season opener of Deep Space Nine, which was a three-parter, first three-parter in Star Trek history, and they rescued a Bajoran prisoner named Lee Nallis from the Cardassians. They had held him for many years after they were supposed to have returned him.
Mm-hmm.
But in his absence, and they were kind of riffing on The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance with these episodes. Yeah, in his absence, the legend had grown large.
Right.
And he came back and wanted nothing to do with the legend. The flip side of that is Charley Red Dog. Charley needs the legend.
Yes.
And I think Paladin understands that.
Yes. What I really like about Paladin in this episode is that he really takes on the role of an ally. Yeah, like, Paladin says, yeah, I don't want to draw on him, and it's because Paladin's not an evil man. Like, it's like, no, I'm not going to draw on him. He's a kid who actually has a lot more integrity than, 99% of people that walk the planet.
Yeah.
And Paladin respects that. I mean, kind of in a similar vein to what he says about Robert April. Paladin shows respect to anyone who is willing to walk the walk and talk the talk, It's not just, talking the talk. Charley, really believes in himself, and he believes in upholding the law. He believes in justice. And frankly, if more people believed in justice, Paladin would be out of work. And I think Paladin would probably be okay with that.
He would probably sit in San Francisco and maybe take up painting or something.
Yeah. Sit around in that groovy smoking jacket.
Absolutely. It seems to me like that's got to be a life goal for him.
Right.
Is not to have to put on the black outfit again. And not have to get onto the back of a horse. He just wants to sit around in that jacket all day. I am very much aligned with that goal. I like that.
Yeah. Agree.
A lot of this episode seemed so modern, you could swear it was written last week.
Yeah.
We have Gene Roddenberry with a half hour of primetime TV to his name in 1959, the very end of 1959. Telling us the world would be a safer place without a gun on every hip in town. It just takes my breath away sometimes, the degree to which Gene can peek around the corner of the 50s and see into the future. Because we are still having to try to tell that story today.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes I actually almost think pop culture is the problem. This is a little bit of a detour, but hear me out here. Everything on our screens, it's expected that there is some action, there is some adventure. And the shorthand for that in American society is the gun. Sometimes it almost feels like, the fact that we have people who seem to want to live in the Wild West because they were reared on this stuff. And I don't want to belabor the point or make the whole podcast about that, but sometimes I don't think you can completely let popular culture off the hook for the effect it's having. And it really feels like Gene is pushing back on that here from 1959. He's like, yes, cool, I'm writing a Western. Some guns are being drawn. Wouldn't it be great if nobody had to do that? Wouldn't it be great if someone went around with a basket and collected all the guns? And he was keeping the place so safe that nobody needed them? How cool would that be? One of the big issues here, of course, is Charlie's heritage. And everyone else in town's inability to see past that. The badge, you would think, would be enough. Nobody knows where he got that badge. Nobody else but Paladin knows about the correspondence course. I will come back to that a little bit later. Because I do feel that's important, and I was kind of crushed when he tore up that diploma. Believe it or not.
Yeah.
The fact that even Paladin, as badass as he is by reputation, he exceeds to Charlie's authority. That should be enough for everybody, but it's still not. It's not for everybody. Most of the guys in the bar, they back down from that.
Yeah.
You still got a half dozen of these knuckle draggers who are... They're either going to chase Charlie out of town. That's the minimum effort reward they're willing to accept. They're probably willing to go a lot further than that. It would be so neat to live in a world where if someone could hand a basket around and everyone drop off their racism and their biases. How cool would that be? Along with the guns. But as we record this, and I don't want to timestamp the podcast too much, there is currently an attempt to disqualify a presidential candidate by way of the Dred Scott decision, which is a disgraceful piece of law from our country's openly racist past that someone is trying to drag out and use to prop up an openly racist present. So, unfortunately, okay, we're at another aspect of this episode that has aged really well.
I really love what this episode does because it illustrates so well about how, yeah, people are not treated well in some circles because of their race or because of who they are. And that's not okay. And it takes someone like Paladin, who is in the position of power, takes their advocacy to help certain people see differently.
Yes, and that's the allyship on display there.
Yes.
That's for 1959. We're in 1959.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I mean, it feels like Gene hopped into a TARDIS for a couple of days, went to the future, and came back and wrote this.
Well, and you saying it's 1959, and I was like, oh crap, that was before the Civil Rights Act passed.
Yeah, and this is one thing I've always said, where Gene is putting Native Americans out there as in his scripts, whether it's this or the Sam Houston project that never got made, and saying, these are our equals, we should treat everyone equally. He's not just talking about Native Americans.
No, he's not. No, he's not. The last line of the episode, which I thought was so good, Charley says that simple Indian boy needs direction almost as much as he needs respect. And Paladin says that respect is important to all men. Some will even risk death for it. And Charley says, and some will just give it. And he shakes Paladin's hand. Paladin just gave Charley his respect as another human being. But in particular, as someone who is trying to act with integrity.
Yeah. And this kind of brings me back to Charley ripping up his diploma. Part of me is just, that broke my heart a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Because Charley and his fake diploma and his tin Marshall star that it has absolutely no legal support behind it. You know, it arrived with his correspondence course with his diploma. Reminds me of this very well-worn comm badge. I've had this since high school. I realize I say this, and I'm holding it up on camera, which isn't helping anyone listening to the podcast. So this is a very old pin that was available from Lincoln Enterprises right after Next Gen started. And, you know, by the way, Lincoln Enterprises, after a few name changes, that's who we're doing this podcast for. So, good investment.
Yeah, dude, that's cool.
Well worth it. There was a time in my teens when I needed direction, I needed support, needed a little bit of supervision, a little bit of encouragement. It was not coming from the adults in my life that it should have been. And so I went through a lot of that part of my life with literally no adults in the house. I kept that pin on me at all times, maybe on a jacket, maybe on my backpack going to school. I just kept it with me somewhere because the question in the back of my head was always, what would make Captain Picard want me to be a member of his crew? Now, I am not going to put my hand on my heart and claim that I always acted in accordance with what would have been worthy of that. I did not succeed in that regard, but I still kept it with me. I still keep it now, because the reminder of the ideal, more often than not, it helped more than it hurt. And even when I failed, you know, I had my equivalent of that tin sheriff star to kind of look at and say, okay, have I earned this today? Maybe not. Maybe not so much. Do better tomorrow. Be the better version of me tomorrow who does earn this. Don't tear that thing up. Don't throw it away. Frame it somewhere. Maybe hang it up at home. It doesn't need to be in the office that you got this U.S. Marshal's diploma from a correspondence course. That's just for Charley. That's just for him. It's a reminder just for him of how far he's come. You know, the diploma is not what confers his authority on him. It's his integrity. It's his ethics and his sense of justice. How much of it was the piece of paper and the tin star? None of it. It was Charley the whole time. But keep that reminder around. So if there was one thing I would change, it would be keep the diploma intact.
No, and I totally get that. And as someone whose principles and ideas about how the world should work was also shaped by fiction. I don't have like a comm badge or a diploma or something that was that reminder, but I too would be a very different person had I not spent a bunch of my childhood reading comics and watching superhero cartoons, and in particularly Disney's Gargoyles. Like, I got so much of my, I feel like I had like a fairly, good upbringing in a lot of respects. I mean, my parents are both people who care about integrity and stuff. And, I was told, you do what you say you're going to do, or you don't say you're going to do it. You treat people with respect. Like, those are things I did learn from my folks. But the thing that really hammered that home was watching Gargoyles, because so much of that show is about what do you do in the face of injustice? You act justly anyway. Even if people do not treat you justly, you still act with integrity. And I was like, whoa, that just blew my mind. And so that is the same kernel that we have here from Gene, made its way into Star Trek, is now making its way into Star Trek Prodigy, and the cycle repeats. I'm so glad my niece and nephew are growing up in an era where they can watch Star Trek Prodigy.
Yeah, the stories have power. And stories like this that tell you, okay, this is not being the bastion of justice is not the sole domain of the white male. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that we have going on here.
Yeah.
And this is, maybe I'm tipping my hand before we even get to the wrap-up. This is one for the ages. This is one of Gene's best scripts for this show.
I think I would agree. There's kind of an elephant in the room, and I don't feel like it detracts. It should not detract from the moral meaning message of this story, because I think this is unfortunately still a relic of the time in which this was made. But obviously, Scott Marlowe is not of indigenous descent. He's got a spray tan.
Yeah, not of indigenous descent that we know of, but yeah,
Yes.
more likely than not, not enough to claim authenticity in that casting.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
It's kind of a double-edged sword, this episode, because
Yeah.
you have that suspect piece of casting, and yet we have a woman directing.
Yeah, yeah.
So we've made a little bit of progress. Some steps forward come with the step back. I don't want to completely, whitewash the fact that the casting is not great. We do not have an authentic Native American playing Charley Red Dog. And also, Scott Marlowe, what the hell was up with that accent?
Yeah, it was a little, at least he spoke in complete sentences.
Most of the time. There was a little bit of Tarzan English in there that kind of made me go, ugh.
Yeah.
But, at the same time, this episode was more cinematic than most of the ones we've seen recently.
Mm-hmm.
Because some of Gene's scripts have been exercises in, please help us meet the budget. We want you to write an episode that happens around this tree.
Mm-hmm.
We want you to write an episode that happens in this hotel lobby set. But you can still have Paladin throw a bunch of guys through a bunch of tables.
Right.
We're never out of money for the tables.
We got all kinds of table money.
Yeah. And yet the standoff in the street, that's some big screen stuff in this.
Yeah, that was a showdown at high noon.
Yeah, and there was some genuine tension to that. And I found myself wondering, Ida Lupino winding up directing this episode, she probably connected with the material very well. Because I'm sure that more than once in her career, she probably ran into the same kind of questioning of her authority in her job that Charley did.
Yeah. And I gotta be honest, as soon as I saw the name pop up on the screen in the end credits, it's like, whoa, this was directed by a woman? Like, are we having like a Leslie scenario? Like there's a guy named Leslie and I just think it's a woman directing? No. To be honest, I didn't know there were even women directing anything in the 1950s. So now I'm all like, well, crap, I've got to go do my homework now. If she was the second director inducted, I need to find out who the first was. So, yeah, like, that blew my mind that a woman was in the director's chair for this, and it's a Western, which is predominantly men in the cast, and things are written by men and for men. And women characters, can be hit or miss. But you get an episode like this that's really solid and has a great message about how are we treating other people, are we belittling people or thinking or othering people?
Yeah.
Because they have a better tan than we do. It's that all of that is just fascinating to me. So I really, Scott Marlowe's casting aside, I really love this episode. I think this might be my favorite episode that we've discussed so far.
If you want to get really meta with it, you remember from the trivia, in this episode, Paladin has Charlie's back. Behind the scenes, Ida Lupino Richard Boone had her back.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. For him to say that in an interview in 1961, that was really cool of him. Like, my qualms with how Paladin does things occasionally in this series aside, like, Richard Boone seems like he was a real ally.
Yeah, and that's really kind of what I came away with in my notes is in front of and behind the screens at the same time. You have really positive examples of allyship, and also, I think the amount of time they had to spend together with Gene being such a frequent writer on the show, and Boone effectively being the showrunner without portfolio. I mean, it was his show. Producers on the show came and went if they butted heads with Richard Boone, the star of the show. That's the kind of clout that he had. I feel like he and Gene... probably they were good influences on each other.
Yeah, I think that is fair.
Ashley, I feel like we tipped our cowboy hats on what we think of this episode during our discussion. I don't know about you, I love this one.
I do too. I said it earlier, but I think this is my favorite episode that I've watched so far of Half Gun Will Travel. This is fantastic.
It is such a great episode to talk about the way that we're discussing our journey through Have Gun, through Gene Roddenberry's scripts, because there is so much Gene Roddenberry on display here without any fear or reservation. Obviously, he has the backing of the show's star, and he has the backing of the producers, because I'm sure the show's star is telling the producers, keep hiring Gene. And so, here in 26 minutes, Gene is pushing back on racism. Gene is pushing back on the notion that society somehow ceases to function without a gun on everyone's hip. And Gene is pushing back on injustice. He's pushing back on one law for me, but another law for thee. We're still fighting all these battles today. They're quite actively embarrassing. It makes it... You could almost be forgiven for thinking society has stood still since 1959. Gene is coming out swinging on all of these fronts, on all of these issues, and yet the episode still feels like it has this laser-like focus on characters that we are introduced to and care about almost immediately. I will back you up that it would hold up better with authentic casting. I really think that if there is an Achilles heel for Charley Red Dog, it's the casting of Charley Red Dog. Scott Marlowe was great as version 1.0 of Roy Carruthers. He's not bad as Charlie, but he is a white actor made up to look Native American. He's doing a weird accent that does not seem to fit the character. And all of that, it could almost undercut what the story is saying, but that decision is on the studio, and that decision is on the producers. Gene handed them a script with a heroic Native American character at the center of it. This is how the makers of the show chose to handle that. That's on them. The story itself is rock solid. This is one of Gene's best scripts that we have covered in the entirety of this show. And if folks listening out there, if you can get around that casting issue, I strongly recommend this episode as a prime cut of what Gene Roddenberry was doing before Star Trek. The story has real lasting value, and it all applies as much now, in every respect, unfortunately, as it did when it first aired. You know why they call it classic TV? It's classic TV gets called classic TV if it's like this, if it's something for the ages. So if anyone is wondering, oh, how woke was Gene really? Watch this episode. He will tell you. This was Gene's last TV work to be broadcast in the 1950s. And so we're days away from 1960. Gene's already operating in the 60s before the 60s have arrived. He's way ahead of his time, and he is ready for the decade that's going to provide him with the ingredients necessary for Star Trek to happen. Okay, I'm going to stop there, because if I don't stop myself, I'm never going to shut up. Ashley, what have you got on this one?
I think all I really have to say is yes and amen to everything that you just said, my friend. I think this is a wonderful treatise of justice, a treatise of how do we push back against racism, and really for the white folks in the audience, how do you be an ally? And I think Paladin does a really great job of explaining that, because I think, like, nobody would ever brand themselves as a racist. Nobody's ever going to say, oh, I'm a racist. And it's harder to say, well, I'm anti-racist, and that I may have built-in prejudices that I may not be aware of because of, the society in which I was brought up, or whatever, but I'm trying to educate myself. I think what we don't always get is, how do you be an ally? Like, how can you be supportive without, going into a white savior complex? And I think Paladin does that really well here, because he defers to Charlie's authority. And yes, he gives him support in a way that isn't cheesy or even, like, 100% quote-unquote explicit. Like, he's not saying, oh, well, you're a racist bigot because you aren't supporting this guy. He just says, no, you just need to back down and show this man some respect.
He's leading by being the example. Exactly.
This, I think, is just a really well done piece of work. And, I mean, it's sad that we have to look past, they didn't actually cast a native person in this role. But again, that is not the fault of the script. The script was written, this is a Native American man in your lead casting.
Yeah, you could remake this episode today with authentic casting, and it would still have the same things to say. Don't change a word.
Yeah, exactly.
Because sadly, we need every message that Gene baked into these 26 minutes so skillfully.
Yeah, because unfortunately, like, I don't think we do this same kind of thing well enough today in our film and television. I think we're too, I don't want to say, like, that we're too overbearing, because, yeah, this is a message that needs to be said loud and clear. But not everybody's going to receive that message if it's loud and clear.
Right, and there's a whole other discussion I could go into that I feel like, just like 60s TV or 50s TV is instantly, you kind of instantly detect the time it came from. I feel like TV from the past 10 years will be the same down the road in the future, that signs of the political moment that we were in, especially in this country, will be very easily detectable in our entertainment. because it seemed like such a struggle that you had to be on the nose. But you could say the same about the original Star Trek. You know, you have an episode with guys who are black on one side, white on the other, or reverse. Because the subtlety wasn't working, sometimes you got to bring in the wrecking ball. But this is an amazing example of the subtlety absolutely working, and it's just so startlingly modern. Yeah, you could absolutely redo this today, not change a word, and the whole message gets through. Gene was firing on all cylinders simultaneously here.
To quote the great philosopher Benny Russell, you can pulp a story, but you cannot destroy an idea. Don't you understand? That's ancient knowledge. You cannot destroy an idea.
And here we are talking about it so many decades later. Mission Log Gene-ology is produced by Roddenberry Entertainment. If you would like to support us directly, you can do so at patreon.com/missionlog for early access to shows and the Mission Log Discord. If you have any material that might be of interest to us that isn't already in the Roddenberry archive, drop us a line at missionlog@roddenberry.com. Our website is missionlogpodcast.com.
On the next Gene-ology, El Paso Stage. Special thanks to consulting producers Matt Esposito, Homer Frizzell, Julie Miller, Mike Richards, Mike Shabel, Paul Shadwell, and David Takechi.
We'll be back next week with more of your favorite programs. This concludes our broadcast day.
This is a Roddenberry podcast. For more great podcasts, visit podcast.roddenberry.com.